What's up everyone, Mysteriocity again appearing on your screens, this time today bringing you a video on the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Brandon Swanson went missing on May 14th, 2008 and his whereabouts remain unknown. Brandon Swanson was 19 years old and studied at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. It was the night before he was supposed to graduate and he was out and about the town celebrating with friends. He proceeded to head home at around midnight when he all of a sudden swerved into a ditch and his car got stuck, and thus he needed a ride back to his house. So he tried calling his friends, but none of them picked up, and eventually he called his parents and told them that he was stuck, needed a ride, but that he was not injured. So he told his parents he was near the small town of Lind, which was a fairly short commute from Marshall, Minnesota, where Brandon lived. So his parents headed that way, and when they got to the spot where he said he was, they began flashing their lights to indicate that they were there, but Brandon couldn't see the lights anywhere in sight. He then proceeded to get back in his car and do the very same thing, and his parents could not see his headlights flashing anywhere in their direction. So everyone started growing frustrated, and Brandon Swanson decided that he was going to abandon his car and walk to the small town of Lind where one of his friends lived. So over the course of the next roughly hour and a half, Brandon mostly stayed on the line with his parents. They hung up a few times but then called each other back as Brandon was still trying to direct his parents to where he was, and Brandon was having a very long conversation with his father, reaching 47 minutes, when just before 2 a.m., Brandon shouted the emphatic words, "Oh shit," and then the call ended abruptly. His parents understandably became worried and called him about 5 or 6 more times, but Brandon never picked up the phone. So then his parents drove around looking absolutely everywhere for Brandon, but there was no sign of him whatsoever. So then at 6:30 a.m., Brandon's parents decided to notify authorities. So later that day, police traced Brandon's phone call to Taunton, Minnesota, which was approximately 25 miles away from Marshall and nowhere near where Brandon said he was. And in Taunton, that is where officials found Brandon's car, but there was no sign of Brandon. So then a massive search party commenced with hundreds of people involved, including law enforcement and volunteers. However, they turned up nothing. Brandon Swanson was nowhere to be found. So I decided to talk about this case today because I'm personally very fascinated by this case, and the biggest question that this case raises is, what exactly did Brandon see when he said, "Oh shit," and then the call ended abruptly? What exactly happened to Brandon at that particular moment? Well, the most common theory that started to emerge was that Brandon fell into the Yellow Medicine River, and at that time, the Yellow Medicine River was at the deepest it had ever been, and the waters had been flowing pretty rapidly throughout that entire week, so that theory started to gain some traction. However, I personally doubt this theory for a number of reasons. First of all, when Brandon was still on the line talking to his father, let's just say that Brandon did not see where he was going, and then before he even knew it, he just all of a sudden lost his footing and fell into the Yellow Medicine River. The reason I highly doubt this is because wouldn't the sound of the rushing waters have alerted Brandon sooner? I should also bring up that there was no reports of Brandon being intoxicated or high during this whole ordeal. It was reported that he had his entire mental capacity. So wouldn't he have heard the sound of rushing waters and knew to turn away from that direction? The river had been flowing very rapidly and, you know, it was the deepest it had ever been at that time. So wouldn't even his father have heard the sound of the river from the phone call? I think Brandon would have had to heard the water for sure and would have turned away, and even if not that, I think his father would have had to heard the water and then obviously say something to Brandon. The other reason I highly doubt this theory is that even if Brandon Swanson did fall into the Yellow Medicine River and he drowned there, as most of you can surmise, when you die, your body releases a bunch of gases, and it is known and has been documented throughout many cases where bodies have been thrown into bodies of water, for lack of a better term, but then they floated back up to the surface because the body was releasing all of these gases, which forced them back up onto the surface of the water. So that same thing would have happened to Brandon if he did indeed drown in the Yellow Medicine River. And you just know that if that happened, someone would have found his body, because the search efforts in this case were tremendous. You had hundreds of people searching hundreds of square miles looking for Brandon Swanson, and you just know that someone would have found his body if that were the case. And the other reason I doubt this theory is that Now, I'm not claiming to be a psychology expert here, but, like, wouldn't the natural response in that situation be to scream? That's just what I think. So anyway, those are the 3 reasons I highly doubt Brandon fell into the Yellow Medicine River, because 1, his father would have heard the sound of the rushing waters or the sound of Brandon falling off the river's edge in the phone call. 2, his body would have floated back up to the surface due to the release of gases, and his body would have been found. And 3, it doesn't make sense that he said, "oh shit," as he was falling off the river's edge, because it just seems like the body's natural response would be to scream. Another theory that emerged is that someone or something jumped at Brandon, which caused the line to be disconnected. Maybe, like someone who was abducting him, or something such as a bear or some other kind of wild animal. Let's just say a person jumped at Brandon. Like, if that were to happen, then why would the phone call suddenly disconnect? Like, I mean, yeah, it would make sense where, you know, the person jumped at him and then, you know, he grabbed Brandon's phone as quickly as possible and then ended the phone call, but wouldn't his father have heard something, like, in those very brief moments that the person grabbed the phone and pressed the end call button? Then wouldn't his father have heard sounds of a struggle or something like that? It's the same thing as if it was some sort of wild animal. I mean, why would the phone call just suddenly disconnect if it was a wild animal? Obviously, a wild animal wouldn't have the instinct to pick up the phone and end the phone call. What could be the most logical theory in this case? Well, I happen to have come up with my own theory of what could have happened to Brandon Swanson. So the theory here that I think is the most plausible is that a car hit Brandon, and the reason he said, "oh shit," over the phone was that he saw a car speeding toward him, and before he could react, he was then hit by that car. And this would explain the phone call ending abruptly, because, you know, obviously if it was a big car, you know, if it was a big car, like, you know, let's just say a big truck, then it likely would have hit the phone while it hit Brandon, and obviously the impact of the truck hitting the phone definitely would have ended the phone call abruptly. Brandon in that moment saw a large vehicle speeding toward him, and before he could have any time to react, such as jumping out of the way, the car hit him and also hit the phone in the process, thus ending the phone call. And obviously, you know, whether the driver intended to hit Brandon on purpose or it was accidental, obviously that cannot be said for sure, but I just think that is the most plausible explanation. So it's very sad what happened to Brandon, and it's also very upsetting that it's been over a decade now and Brandon Swanson's disappearance has remained unsolved. No body has ever been recovered, and there has been absolutely no leads to indicate where Brandon could have gone. Brandon was described by his parents and by his friends as a very focused person, one who was determined to get ahead and do big things with his life. And, you know, it all just ended on one night where Brandon decided to go out and party with friends and have some fun, and then all of a sudden it just ended right there. It's very sad, but anyway, I do hope that one day something happens, just even one small tiny lead that leads investigators on a trail to maybe finding Brandon Swanson's body, or maybe finding Brandon if he's possibly alive. Obviously, it would provide Brandon's family and his close friends a sense of closure, and, you know, maybe in that way they could finally determine what exactly happened to Brandon Swanson in those very brief moments. But anyway, I want to know what you think of the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. What do you think could have happened to Brandon? Do you have your own explanations? Whatever your thoughts, whatever your opinions, leave them in the comment section below. And if you have any mysterious footage you've captured, whether photo or video, from whatever kind of device, send it to me via my email, which will be posted in the description below or in the outro card at the end of this video. Be sure to follow me on social media. I recommend Twitter the most. So like, share, comment, subscribe, show support, and I will return it by giving you guys the best content that I can possibly deliver. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, peace out!